Appreciate it, Barry and Pastor Gary. I appreciate the opportunity to do this, and I appreciate the turnout tonight as well, because this is, I think, 186 times that I've done churches that I've done this in over the last 18 years, and this is a good turnout comparably to a lot of the places that I've been, even across our own district. This is something that so many people know is out there, but we tend to, in church, have the ostrich syndrome. And that is, if we don't talk about it and kind of bury our head in the sand and don't really think about it too much, then it won't be an issue for us. The problem is that, you know, if you pay attention to someone who's living the ostrich syndrome, they really give a huge target for the enemy, and because you're just going to get kicked in the backside. You really are. That's okay, man. That happens to me sometimes too. But I do appreciate the opportunity to come, and because this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and something that I've been pushing for a long time in the assemblies in our district. In 1994, when we instituted this at Niceville, we were the first church in the entire Assemblies of God to do this. And we were the first church that Church Mutual insured that had child protection training in the church. And so on one hand, I'm proud of that, but on the other hand, it's a sad indictment on churches across this country in an era when child abuse is so rampant that we have really been lagging getting ourselves on board with this whole possibility and the probability of it, and trying to reduce the risk. Before I get started in it, let me just say that over the last few years, your pastor has become a great friend of mine and a great mentor. He and I talk almost weekly, and the friendship that we've developed, at least on my end, it's one that I cherish. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. So let's pray, and then we'll just kind of get into it tonight. And I'll talk for a little bit, and then I'll try to answer any questions that you may have. And probably everything I'm going to talk about, you guys are already there. But we'll go at it anyway. Father, thank you tonight for the opportunity to be here. And I would just pray, God, that you would open our minds and our hearts, that as we look at reducing the risk, that it would be something that takes root, that it's something that we recognize that one of the spiritual truths of our lives as Christians is to be stewards, and to be good stewards of the resources and those that God has put into our stead, and that is children especially. Because you did say that if we offend one of these little ones, or if we cause one of these little ones to be a stumbling block, that it would be better for a millstone to be hung around our neck and be cast into the sea. And Father, we don't want to be an offense, and we don't want to have someone be wounded or damaged due to a lack of awareness, God. So just pray tonight that you would do your work in all of our lives. And I pray that the things that you would have me say tonight, God, that they would be under your anointing and under your leadership and guidance. And I'll give you the praise and glory for it in Jesus' name. And everybody said amen. Okay, let's just kind of get cranking with this thing. We've got to, thank you. The first thing is to really recognize why we're here. And I looked over, Barry sent me your policy about a month ago and asked me to look over it, and I did, and it's very similar in nature to ours. So some of what I'm going to say to you tonight probably will be redundant, but I'm just going to give you what I give every church that I'm asked to go into and do this. And so this is kind of the deal. So why are we here? To understand what abuse is and prevent abuse from occurring in our church and the related activities of our church. This training covers all forms of abuse, and though, as you noted as well in the media, that sexual abuse typically gets the greatest media attention. But we're going to deal with it from a broad spectrum tonight. What is abuse? Abuse is to injure or damage. From a spiritual perspective, if you want to put it into a different context, the meaning of the word abuse is to use something for a purpose for which it was not intended. And when someone has been abused and someone is abused, that individual, someone is using that individual, whether it's a child or a woman or a man or whoever it is, they are using that person for an object that God never intended that person to be used for. And so we've got to be clear on that piece of this. That's what abuse really is. But according to Florida law, they have a definition. And it's this. It's not limited to this, but it includes all of these: striking, slapping, shaking, pinching, yanking, smothering, inappropriate contact with body parts, fondling, kissing inappropriately, intercourse, severe shaming, sexual remarks, showing porn or body parts, and watching sexual activities. The thing that has been kind of one of the hindrances or the obstacles in churches is the understanding of who abuse impacts. And they say, well, typically most people look at it, well, it impacts the person that's being abused and that family. But that's not the case. Abuse affects everybody. Everyone that is attached to that organization. Everyone that sits and watches on the news when another allegation has come out. It does something inside of you when you see that allegation on television. There's a piece of you that wants to rise up. You feel that anger and that compassion. You feel all those emotions at once when you see that. So any abuse that comes to light affects everyone that hears about it or knows about it. Child abuse occurs at every socioeconomic and social level and cultural level. Where you came from doesn't make you any less immune or more in danger of this. It is what it is. Every ethnic and religious line and at all educational levels. Statistically, what we know today is that 1 out of every 4 people in our society today has been abused in some form or another. So statistically in this room tonight, 1 out of every 4 people in this room, you have suffered some form of abuse. Statistically, that may not be the case, but that is the statistics. I'll get it out in a minute. But we have to recognize that, and that it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. I run across someone the other day. I was speaking to a group of individuals about this, and they were asking, and they were kind of looking at it from a perspective of, should we really go to this? That sounds very legalistic and blah 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 blah. And that, the Catholic Church has a problem with this, but we're not a Catholic church, so we really don't have a problem with this. And it's, the Catholic Church, the thing that's happened in the Catholic Church over the last 15 years has just brought it more into the limelight. This is something that's been prevalent in our society for 30 years. And really ramping up even now, more and more in the 21st century. How many people are abused? In the United States, between 500,000 and 1.5 million children, this is just children, are abused sexually every year. 27% of women and 16% of men have experienced some form of sexual victimization as children. 1/4 of all women have experienced some form of sexual victimization as children. Over 25% indicated that it was before the age of 9. Before the age of 9. And in this country, a report of child abuse is made every 10 seconds. So every 10 seconds, someone is reporting child abuse in this country. More than 90% of juvenile sexual abuse victims know their perpetrator in some way. It's not just strangers. Most of the time, 9 out of 10 times, when it is juvenile sex abuse, the victim knows the person that they've been abused by. It's typically a relative or a friend of the family or something like that. So this is not something that we typically have to look at from a perspective of, well, there's a stranger in town, from that perspective. In Florida, how many are abused in Florida? And this is for the fiscal year of 97 and 98. Now, here's the thing about the stats. I had my staff go back through and check all the stats, and there hasn't been a lot of research done on this since the mid to late 90s. There's not a lot of new research. Church Mutual is doing some, and I'll share some of those stats in just a few minutes with you. But in 97 and 98, which is what we're dealing with now, that's 14, 15 years ago, 360 maltreatments. 40% involve physical aggression or injury toward children. 7% involve sexual victimization. Churches, that's just in society in general. Now let's look specifically at churches, as that's where we fit. Church Mutual, which is our insurance company, I don't know if you have those folks or not, but I know we have Church Mutual, receives approximately 258 sex abuse claims every year. That averages out to about one every business day. One every single solitary business day that they are open. The vast majority of these claims, the vast majority of these allegations are groundless. But they still put churches and families and workers through such turmoil. Now here's the thing about this. Even if the allegation is proven to be untrue, there is a stigma attached to the individual and to the organization that lasts for years. It lasts for years. It's not something that you can look at, okay, well, that was just an allegation and it was proven, it was unfounded. It doesn't matter. If the allegation is made and it hits the media, you have a label. And for years, people will drive by your location and they will go, that's the church where that abuse took place. Even if it goes to court and the church is exonerated, that there was no negligence or anything like that, there's still a stigma attached to that church. And I run into this all the time across this country in talking with pastors and dealing with church boards and things like that, and teaching this, not just in our district, but in Alabama and Georgia and some other places that I've taught it as well, that there are churches that have gone through this. The allegations have been found groundless, no grounds for the allegation, it's been thrown out, but there is a stigma in that community attached to that organization. And it doesn't have to be churches, but we're a church, so that's what we're dealing with tonight. But anytime there's a daycare, anytime there's a preschool, anytime there's anything like that, if there's an allegation, most of the time it takes years and years to overcome that, if it's ever overcome at all. And that is just the reality. Unfortunately, we tend to look at it from a perspective of, well, we're just going to pray and God's going to take care of this. Well, God admonishes us in Scripture to be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. He admonishes us in Scripture to take care of those that cannot take care of themselves. It's the whole message of justice, mercy, and humility that God tells us in Micah 6:8 that He requires of us. We've got to be able to do this, and we've got to look at this from a different perspective than just, well, that we're just going to pray, I have a prayer covering over this church, and we're just going to believe God, He's going to protect us. And God's looking up at us in heaven and going, look, I'm providing ways that you can take care of this. Use wisdom. Use wisdom. It kind of reminds me of the story, a humorous story, but it kind of drives the point home. Years ago, I heard this story about this man who, the river started to flood. And it come up around his yard and around his house, and he couldn't get to his vehicle, and he started praying, God, deliver me. Please help me. Deliver me from this flood. And a few minutes later, here come a guy by on a canoe, and he paddled up to the porch, and he said, hey, get in the canoe. Let's get out of here. He said, no, I'm believing God. God's going to deliver me. And he said, okay, and he paddled on down the road. Water got up to the roof. He's on top of the roof of his house. And a boat comes by. You know, a rescue boat comes by. He said, come on, get in the boat, you know. And he said, no, I'm believing God. God's going to rescue me. He gets up on the chimney. And on top of the chimney, there's a TV antenna. He crawls up on the antenna, and a helicopter comes over and hovers over and says, grab a hold of the rope. We'll pull you to safety. And he said, no, I'm waiting on God to deliver me. And the helicopter goes on. The man drowns. He stands before God, and he said, God, I prayed for deliverance. Why didn't you deliver me? Why didn't you answer my prayer? He said, I sent you a canoe, a boat, and a helicopter. Why didn't you take hold of the rope? See, the reality of what we've got to understand is, yes, we're to pray, and yes, we're to believe God, and yes, God will protect us. But God gives us sense enough to understand that His Word admonishes us to be good stewards of the resources. And children are resources. Our parishioners are resources. You are resources. And we have to make sure that we do due diligence to protect them. So churches are a huge target and have been for the last 15 years or so. The bottom line is this, that churches are a place of trust. When people come to church, they come to church because it's a safe place. If they find out that that place is not safe, they will not come. They will not leave their children in a place where they cannot be assured of the safety of their children. Growing churches are full of minors. All churches are full of minors. People are flocking to our churches right now, and they're bringing their children. They've been away from church for a lot of years. They're coming back to church. They're bringing their children because they may have been in church when they were children, got away from church in their college years. They're now married, starting having children of their own, and they're going, we really need to get back in church. And they're looking for places that they can trust. But when you start seeing that, the need is that we got to have workers, and we got to have workers fast. And we are notorious, and I'm saying we, I put all of us in this category. If we have a need of something and someone walks up and says, I want to work in children's department. Yes, we will let you work in the children's department because we need teachers. We need teachers. And it doesn't matter if it's a small church or a large church. We have to be careful in just putting people in a hole because there's a hole there. We run into a situation a few years back where we had in 3 and 4 year olds, we had so many 3 and 4 year olds in our classroom that we had to cut off and tell people you can't drop your kids off in this class. We didn't have enough workers to open up another room, but we couldn't take any more kids in that room, so we had to send parents away with 3 and 4 year olds because we didn't have enough workers in there. Now, in the process of all that, we had someone that came in and said, hey, I will take care of the 3 and 4 year olds in the next room. And our children's pastor looked and said, well, you're not an approved worker. I know, but it's okay. Just let me do this for a few weeks. It'll be fine. Now, we had a choice to make in that moment. We could violate our policy and open up another room to have kids go in there, or we could be true to the commitment that we've made to our families and to our children and go, you know what? It's better to send children into the sanctuary than it is to violate the policy and open up another room with people that we are not sure of their approval status. We haven't put them through the process. We haven't done the background checks on them. And so we had to make a hard call. And it took some weeks for us to come to get that to a place where we could open up another room to take care of those kids in there. So and everybody faces these types of things. Everybody faces these things. And years ago, it was no big deal. Someone gets saved on Sunday morning. They're up on Sunday night testifying of God, what God did on that Sunday morning. The next Wednesday night, they're teaching the Royal Rangers. That used to be the way we operated in the Assemblies of God. And I remember that. I grew up in that. We can't do that anymore. We can't do that. We have to know those who labor among us. We have to know those individuals that we're putting in charge of our children and all of our minors in ministry. And actually, and you already said that you run your worship team through background checks, and we do the same thing. It's just wisdom. It's just wisdom. The pedophiles that are in our society, in our culture today, they're looking for quick, easy access. That's why the policies have to be in place. It's 90% of the abuse cases are perpetrated by individuals who know the victim. They know the victim. So they want something that's easy, they want something quick, and they will search out. They are smart. They will search out churches that don't have the policies. They will search out churches that are looking for workers. And they will sit in your congregation, and I've been in churches before leading up to a Sunday night when we were doing this, and I've listened to the pastor on Sunday morning go, hey, is there someone here, can we have some of our folks go back and help us in the nursery this morning? We need some little extra help in the nursery. And a couple people pop up and run to the nursery. You're asking for trouble. You're asking for trouble. It's better to close the nursery than to do that. It's better to do that because all it takes is an allegation. But God forbid that it was ever a founded allegation where it was actually you were proven to be negligent. Because then, the doors will close. The doors will close. Who benefits from prevention? All of us. Everybody does. Everyone benefits for it. And the question that we've got to ask is, are we at risk? Is Valparaiso Assembly at risk? Yeah. If you have activities, if you have minors, if you have adults, if you have stuff going on, you are at risk. You bear some level of risk. And the task at hand and the reason that I'm here tonight is to help you reduce that risk. I may not tell you anything that you don't already know, but just the fact that your pastor has enough foresight and vision to bring me in and let me talk to you about this says that he wants to make sure that the children in this place are taken care of and are safe, and that the adults feel that this is a place of safety as well. The question that you've got to ask is, are you doing everything that you can do? Is there something else that you can do to prevent abuse from happening here at Valparaiso Assembly? Yeah, there's always something else you can do. But the churches that get on board with this, church-wide, realize that it takes everybody to make it work. When we instituted this, I think it was in 1994, we instituted the reducing the risk, and we sit down and we drew up the policies. I went to Springfield and spent a day with Richard Hammer, talking with him, trying to get some feedback from him on exactly which way we needed to go. I sat with our insurance company. We talked with them. We worked through the whole deal. Then we went to our board. The board ratified it, and then we introduced it to our congregation. And everybody was on board with it. It was a great thing. Yeah, we need to do this, until we started the process. Because we decided, and our board decided, that we were going to run everybody who was presently working in our ministries through the process. And we had some wonderful little ladies who had been teaching in our church, in our children's department, for 23, 24, 25 years. And now they're given an application and a consent form for a background check. And that did not go over so well. It didn't go over so. I got to tell you the truth. It just didn't. I've been teaching in here for 23 years. Why do I have to do something like this? Because we're all doing it. I'm the lead pastor of the church. I did it. I still, after all these years, every year, I do a child protection training review every year. I take the test over, take the class over every year. My entire staff does this. We all do it every year. We don't ask someone to do something that we don't do. So we go through this process. But what has to take place is that everybody has to get on board. I had some deacons that at that time that it was okay until they had children, and their children were going into our nurseries, and we have a policy that if you use our nurseries, you have to work our nurseries. So now I have deacons that are faced with, here's your application for ministry, and we're going to do a background check on you. And they go, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to work in the nursery. Well, you put the policy in place. You said we're going to have an obligatory nursery, so guess what? Fill out the form and go through the process, and you'll work the nursery. So you run into all these issues with it. But now I can tell you now, 18 years later, that our congregation is very much at peace. And it didn't take 18 years. It took about 2 for the congregation as a whole to embrace the whole reducing the risk ideology, and it's a part of our culture now. And it is what it is. And everybody knows the deal and knows why we do it, because it is for the protection of the children, the minor children that God has placed under our care. And each of you here at Valp, you are the key to ensuring a safe environment for your kids and for your teenagers. You are the key to it. The good news, child protection training policy addresses the key issues. It addresses the procedures that you need to understand to help reduce the risk of abuse in your church. And so let's kind of walk through that process. I don't remember exactly what your process for reporting is, Barry, but I'm just going to tell you what ours is, and I'll show you the statutes in Florida statutes, how this is the requirement and how we go about it. If a minor tells you that he or she is being abused, the first thing has to take place is that you have to report that to the proper authority. And then you report it to your pastor. That's Florida law. A lot of churches look at it from the perspective of, okay, I'm going to go tell my pastor, and then it's the pastor's responsibility at that point. That is not the case in the state of Florida. Every citizen in the state of Florida is a mandatory report. You cannot pass the buck to somebody else. If a minor child tells you that they are being abused, then it is your legal responsibility to report that. Now, what you can do is, when you hear of that, you call one of your pastors or whoever you guys have as your point person and go, look, I just want to tell you what was said, but you understand that I've got to make this phone call. You've got to make this phone call. It has to happen. And you can do an anonymous report, 1-800-ABUSE, and all that kind of stuff, but But you report to the proper authorities. Then you talk privately out of earshot with the child. You pull them aside. You talk to them for a few minutes. Don't when they tell you something, don't go. Oh! Don't express shock. Don't panic. Because that's gonna cause that child, that minor, to just turn right into themselves, and they're going to shut down on you. So you've got to make sure that they understand that this is a safe conversation. You've got to express your belief that what they're telling you is actually true. Because one of the problems in this country and why there's not more cases actually reported is because most minors feel like that an adult will not believe them if they tell that. After 30 years of pastoral ministry, I can tell you that I have dealt with dozens and dozens and dozens of adults who went through abuse as children that are carrying the scars and all the pain of that 30 years later because they could not tell anyone when they were a child when the abuse was taking place because they didn't think anybody would believe them. So we're dealing with 500,000 to 1.5 million reports every year. There's probably 5 times that many that are never reported. 5 times that many that are never reported because they don't think anybody's going to believe them. Who's going to believe me if I tell them that brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so or aunt so-and-so or uncle so-and-so who is a upstanding person in the community or one of the patriarchs or matriarchs of our family, that they touched me or they did this to me or they did that to me? Who's going to believe me? And so they shut down. They shut down. It's only been a year or so ago that I dealt with a young lady that came into my office, and she was visibly broken in the altar one time. I'd never met her before, but she was in the altar, and she came in in a week or two later, and she had just turned 21, and she was leaving home, going to college. She'd been out of school for 3 years, but she had been abused by her father from the time she was 4 years old until she was 20 years old. This took place. And she never told a soul. Because she said, who would believe me? I was a kid. And now she's in her mid-20s, in her early to mid-20s, and she's in intense therapy, trying to move past all of that for years and years and years. So, folks, this is real. This is not something that's happening in other cities and other places. We live in Niceville, Valparaiso, the Twin Cities area. This is the number one place in the state to raise kids. But it doesn't mean we're immune from issues and stuff. The bad stuff is here. You peel back the pretty stuff, and there's some ugly there. There's some ugly there. And we deal with it all the time. So if someone tells you that they're being abused, report to the proper authorities. Make sure the pastor or the board, whoever you have that you have in your line of reporting, knows about it. Talk privately out of earshot with the child. Don't panic. Don't express shock. Express your belief that you think they're being truthful, and then reassure that minor that it is good to tell what's going on. That it's good to tell what's going on. One of the things that I'll look at I'll tell you in just a few minutes is privileged communication, and we'll talk about this in a minute. But we don't need to do that just yet. Once you reassure them that it's not his or her fault, then you've got to determine their immediate need for safety. And this is where your pastoral staff and your leadership will come into play more actively, because sometimes you've got to make a phone call right then and there, and sometimes you've got to get authorities on the scene immediately to get that child out of that house for the sake of their life. Now, fortunately, I've never had to go that route but one time in the last 15 or 18 years. It's not something that you relish doing. But you've got to determine if they need if they're in danger immediately, or if this is something that you can wait on the report and the process to get kicked in. And then you assure your best effort to protect and support them, and you tell the minor what you're going to do the whole way. Tell them the whole way in the deal. Now, the thing about disclosure in the state of Florida is this, that every person in Florida is a mandatory reporter. And even in the counseling room, even in spiritual guidance, as pastors, privileged communication does not apply in the area of abuse. In the area of lawyers and doctors, abuse is not privileged communication. Every single solitary citizen of the state of Florida, if you are told that this is taking place, or you have firsthand knowledge that abuse is taking place, you are required by law to report that. You're required by law. I would urge you, and this is one of the training that we do with our altar teams, and I do this with my staff and all of our leadership. I don't do it anymore, but the staff does it. Is when we start doing the training, and you're talking with someone in the altar, in a classroom, after church, and you begin to notice that the conversation is moving toward disclosure of something, and you kind of have an inkling that, okay, this person's fixing to tell me that they've been abused. And you can pretty well tell most of the time. What we recommend that you do, and what we tell our staff and our leadership is, okay, now you stop that person. I need to stop you right here. Because you need to understand, if you tell me that you have been abused, I'm going to report this. I'm going to walk you through this. I'm going to be with you this whole way. But you need to understand that if you tell me this, I am legally bound to report it. Because what happens many, many times is they will divulge that, and then they will say what? Please don't tell anybody. You cannot agree to that. Now, a lot of people still try to do it. And I know a lot of pastors that have tried to get around this. But it's only been a few years ago that not one of our AG pastors, but a pastor in a town near here was all over the news. He was handcuffed in his office and escorted out of his office on Monday morning because he refused to report an abuse that was taking place in a family in his church. That the minor came to him and said, this is what's happening. And he said, okay, we're going to take care of this. We're going to counsel the whole family through this, and we're going to move you through this, and we're going to pray, and God's going to do a great work, blah, 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 blah. And bottom line is, one of the school teachers found out about it. She reported it the way it was supposed to be reported. When the investigation ensued, he was arrested and had to go to jail. And that is a reality. That is a reality. And it's not just preachers. And I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to give you cold, hard reality as we live it in the 21st century. You have to report child abuse. If someone tells you that you're a mandatory reporter. Now, one of the things that we use, and it's not on the CD that I'm going to give you tonight, Barry, but I've got two copies of it. A few years ago, when we were redoing our policies and stuff and doing some more research, we put together a spiritual guidance intake form, which means this: as a pastor, I cannot do counseling. In the state of Florida, you cannot counsel unless you are a licensed counselor with the state of Florida. Unfortunately, we have a lot of pastors that think that because they're a pastor, they're also a counselor, and that's not true. We can do spiritual guidance, and we need to know the difference, because there's a big difference. There's a big difference in counseling and spiritual guidance. But anybody that comes in to see any of our pastoral staff, they have to fill out this spiritual guidance intake form. And what it does, it walks them through the privileged communication guidelines. And if someone requires privileged communication, then they can check and say, we want this to be, and it's legally bound. You have to hold it in privilege. But there's also a clause in there that tells them under no circumstances will we hold abuse as privileged communication, because we can't legally. I'll give you these two, and you can take a look at them, and if you want to use them, fine. It just helps across the board, saves a lot of wear and tear. People understand it up front. But there is no such thing as privileged communication in regards to abuse. Okay. Our role in disclosure. Your role is not to investigate. Your role is to report and set in motion the process to help and support. The downside, and 1-800-96-ABUSE is the number. And you can report anonymously and all that kind of stuff. The problem is, and this is the thing that I've seen in every case when we've had to make the phone call, we rarely get the opportunity to work with the families. There's a whole lot of pieces to it, and it's sad, and you wish it wasn't true, but it is a fallout from the nature of the beast, I guess. You know, you want to be able to do that. You want to be able to be an agent of restoration, and you're open to doing that. It's just that because of the embarrassment, because of everything that goes on, they typically won't stay in your church. They typically won't stay. They'll move on and go somewhere else and try to work through it other ways. And that's the downside. Now, that's not a cold, hard fact. I have no research to back that up other than we've been doing this 18 years. We've reported probably, I don't know, maybe a half a dozen cases in 18 years where a minor came in and said, this is what's going on by my uncle, by this person, by that person, by this, something, blah, blah, blah. Nothing ever on our property, nothing ever to any of our activities, ever. But it's happened in homes and other places, and we've had to report those things. But we have yet to be able to be an agent of restoration and healing in that particular situation, because they leave. And now they've gone to other places and received it, and so we're grateful and we give God the glory for that, because that's huge. But, it is what it is. But even knowing that, we still have to understand we have to report every allegation that we know. And we're not really supposed to investigate it, to try to figure it out. I mean, there's sometimes when you know the history of somebody that you can work a little bit there, but the real deal is knowing what's going on. And I do urge you that if someone makes an allegation and tells you that they've been abused, that, especially if they tell you here at the church, hang on just a minute, let me get Pastor Barry, let me get Pastor Gary, let's have a conversation, let's talk about this. Because there had been a couple of times that just a few small questions we found out that it really wasn't abuse, it was the fact that they had gotten out of line at home and Dad tore their fanny up. And I can tell you that there are a lot of people, and I've been in a lot of homes where the husband and wife, the mom and dad, they don't spare the rod, they use it. And the kid, they call 911 and my dad's abusing me, and the cops show up, and HRS or DFS now shows up, and the parents kind of say, can you come over to the house? We've got a problem. And I walk up and there's all this, and I'm sitting there, and as the investigators are going through the whole process with the child, they walk in, they sit down with the parent, they bring the child in, and they look at the child and they go, your parents have every right to discipline you for doing wrong. And if they choose to spank you, they can do that. As long as they're not making you bleed or anything like that. If that is the consistent way that they choose, and I've seen that time and time again, where, and they walk out and the parents go, the investigators go, you're clear, you're good. But the neighborhood's going, what's going on over there? So, it's kind of one of those deals. So how do you get started? Adopt the policy and support it. If you've got a policy, stick to it. It is better not to have a policy than it is to have one and not enforce it. There is something in the legal system that is known as due diligence. That if you have a policy and you're not enforcing it and you have an incident, then that goes beyond negligence. You are not showing due diligence, so that means you know that the possibility is there and you refuse to administer the policy. And so that goes beyond negligence, and it's almost death to any organization. Infamous screening program, you're already there, I think. The two-worker rule. Just by putting in the screening process and the two-worker rule, you will diminish your liability 96%. Just by a screening process, and make sure everywhere there's minors that there's 2 people in every room every time you have minors. 2 approved people in that room. That diminishes your liability by 96%. There are a lot of other things that you can do, but if you do everything that you can possibly do, fingerprinting, putting windows in your minor classrooms, cutting half doors in your nursery rooms, whatever you choose to do there, you're never going to get any better than 97, 98%. You're never going to alleviate all your liability. It's not possible. It's not possible. So you've got to weigh out what is beneficial, what's going to be the best way to spend the money to do what you need to do. Now, one of the things that's happened in the last few years is with all the websites now that are popping up doing background checks, that we really don't have to spend $25 to $40 or more on a background check anymore when you can get them done for $4 or $5 or even free on some of the websites. We use We use Ben Verified. We buy a subscription to Ben Verified. And so we do most of our stuff through them now. But we have a couple of other ones that I think Accufax is one that, I think it's Accufax. I've been so removed from that for the last few years, I don't really know. But it's another organization that if something comes back and there's nothing through Ben Verified, then we go through the other agency. So we always go the extra mile with those. So that's a part of what we do. Here's what we do with our screening process. You have to be in regular attendance for at least 3 months. It used to be 6 months. We changed that about 6 or 8 months ago, because with the change in the mission at Eglin and at Hurlburt Field and at Duke Field, over the next 3 years, we're going to be a more transient community than we've ever been before. The vast majority of people that are going to be coming into Eglin and to Hurlburt Field and to Duke Field are only going to be here 12 to 18 months maximum. So if you wait 6 months to put somebody into work at your church, the chances of them actually plugging in and being a part of what you do is slim to none. So we backed up and we went, okay, we're not going to do away with it. We have to have a waiting period because we do not want people to have quick, easy access. So we put 3 months on it. And that 3 months is from the first time that they attend church. When they attend church, they've got to come regularly for 3 months, and then they become a member of the church. They complete the child protection initial training, which is on our website. Feel free to go on our website and take a look at it. It takes 12 minutes. What I'm taking 40 minutes to do tonight, we take 12 minutes to do on the website. And they take a little test at the end of it. Every worker reviews it annually. Every year they have to go through this and renew it to stay on the approved worker list. They're an official member. I've already said that. We do background checks and we do reference checks. The reference checks, we don't stop someone when everything else is done. Membership, attendance, the background checks, all of those, when all that's finished, and if we've got 2 or 3 references, they'll go in the file. We don't stop that person from engaging because they don't have enough references in, and here's why. We used to, and it would take months to get people plugged in because a lot of people don't want to give references on people anymore. But I've never known of anyone to send a request for a character reference to an enemy. You know what I'm saying? They always send to their friends. And friends are always going to go, at least most of the time, the friends are going to go, great person. I trust them with my own kids. Blah, 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 blah. You know, I mean, really, you rarely get a negative reference from reference checks. So we don't put a whole lot of stock in that. We do it as just another level. But we do the background checks to the highest level that we can, nationwide criminal background checks. And we do some, especially if people have been overseas with the military and stuff like that, we do some additional checks there. They complete the application for ministry. They interview with a pastor or department leader, and then the pastoral reviews are taken, and an executive pastor has to sign off for the final approval. And so that's kind of the deal. That's how we do that. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. Anybody got any questions? Any questions at all?
You guys have questions about our own church policies. One of the things that we do here is that we haven't adopted the 3-month policy just yet. It's still 6 months on our paperwork. We'll review that, and Pastor and I will talk about it and so forth. One of the things that we also do here is try to keep an open door policy when there's classes meeting here at the church for Sunday school or any other time, is that we have, if we don't have a half door, we don't have windows on our doors, then we leave the door open. And most times I've seen our Sunday school classrooms, they keep their door open for visibility's sake. That's a big deal, is that, we may not, and our church, even though we have the policy of the 2-person rule, our policy says when possible, because it's not often possible at this point in our context to have 2 people in every classroom. But what we do is try to encourage safety by making sure the doors remain open or the half doors, stay open, and that sort of thing. So that's just a little bit of clarity on our end at this point.
Well, and
May
you
change,
can, and you can also, one of the things you can do, and I've encouraged a lot of churches to do this that have issues with having enough help to do the two-person deal. Cut windows between the classrooms so that you look down a hallway and you have visibility through all the classrooms. From one, you look in one classroom, you're looking this way and you see, the activities in all the other classrooms. That's another one of those layers, and you can be creative with some of this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, the real drop in liability is the two-person rule, and that's the thing that most of the cases when they're looking at due diligence, that's what they're looking at. Do you have the things in place? And there's one other thing. Can I share real quick that one of the things that we're facing now in our culture is we have a large number of sex offenders that are attending churches. They go to jail for whatever time they spend. Sometimes it is because they molested a child. They weren't listed as a predator, but they are on the sex offender registry. Or you may have a young man who is 19, 20 years old dating a 17-year-old, and they get caught in a compromising position. Mom walks in, they're caught in a compromising position. She cries rape, and he goes to jail. And I know this to be a fact because this has happened. And we have a young man that's in prison today. That is the scenario. There's a lot of that, but they're sex offenders. They're labeled sex offenders. And as a result of that, they carry that label the rest of their life. Well, most insurance companies now, you can't work them in any capacity in your church. They can't be a worker in your church, period. And you certainly can't use them in the areas of minors. But what we've found out is that we have to actually restrict what building they can be in and what door they can come through and what parking lot they can use. And if you'd told me 35 years ago when I really started moving into ministry that I was going to have to deal with this kind of stuff in 2012, I would have told you were nuts. But this is the kind of stuff that we've got to deal with. And so, when we deal with these types of things, and most every church on the planet, it doesn't matter the size of the church, there are sex offenders that will attend regularly. We have our staff. We have one lady on our staff. Her job every month, the first of every month, is to spend 2 days perusing the sex offenders registry in the state of Florida. Looking at pictures. Our security team, they look at it every month. Look at pictures. So that if someone comes in, if they see stuff, this person looks familiar, they'll print the copy of the picture, and the security team will have it on Sundays. And if they come into our buildings, there's a security person that's attached to them, and it just kind of shadows them. And if they move out of our main building to where our children and our students are, they're stopped, pulled aside into a quiet place, into a room, and we sit down with them, we have a conversation with them. You're welcome here, you're welcome to worship here, but you have to stay out of these buildings. These are the requirements of your situation. You are a registered sex offender, so you've got to go that route. That's a new wrinkle to this whole thing that 35 years ago we've never even thought about this, but now it's there. So that's another piece.
One of the other facts, if it's the same as it has been about 5 years ago, there are at least 20 within registered sex offenders within a 5-mile radius of our church, our daycare. I think Shannon may have given me that information as well. So they're right here, right around us.
Does not surprise me.
Yeah.
It does not surprise me.
So, and another thing too that we have going for us is that the daycare has strict policies as well, and a lot of that is bled over into what we do in our church ministries. Adopting this, has helped a great deal. So we just, the bottom line is we want to keep our kids safe. And, as far as one of the things I wanted to point out too, about the little ladies that I've been teaching, Sunday school for 25 years. That, what do you mean I got to fill out this application? I've been doing this for 25 years. The point is not about the church recognizing your ministry. Mm-hmm. It's about the fact that some visiting child, some visiting family with children are putting them in a classroom, and they don't know that lady from the Man in the Moon. Right. And we get teenagers that come into our youth group whose parents, they don't know me, they don't know this church. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, one of our sister churches in our district they had kind of a policy set up, or at least a checks and balances system set up where a young lady came into the youth group, started to attend. No, it wasn't even youth group. It was one of the Wednesday programs for children, and they this particular girl went home. She got mad at somebody at the church and went home, told her mom that such and such had happened. Yep. And so the mom gets a lawyer, and they file suit against the church. And as the story goes, what happened is that they went back to the day that, because every incident has to have a date of incident. I mean, I remember working in the insurance. Mm-hmm. You don't have any case if you can't pinpoint the date of incident. And anyway, that particular date of incident, they went through their roster, and they kept sign-in sheets of all the kids that that were there, and they checked off the names of the children, youth, or whatever, and they went back and said, this girl wasn't even here that night, and so that case got completely dismissed. It's because of simple things like that, just checks and balances. And I do that for my youth group. I don't know. I know that I believe that the children's ministry on Wednesday night, they have you check in the kids and all that stuff. That's huge. That's a good deal.
It really is, and we and I'll give you this folder. It's got all of our forms and all this kind of stuff in it. But what we did in 2006, we've done the two-person, we've done the windows, we've done all that kind of stuff. We have a good solid policy, but we just wanted to go one step, and we looked at, okay, do we do fingerprint or do we do cameras? And we chose to go camera. We put cameras in every room on our campus where there's minors. There's at least 2 cameras in every room, and it's constantly recording. They're motion activated. Someone walks in the room, the camera clicks on, and it's recorded and stored in a data bank. And we did have a situation about 2 years ago. A lady came to church and picked up her child from one of our toddler rooms or something like that, and the kid was agitated, the whole service, the whole day, and she got in the car and she said they've done something to my child, and so she comes back in and she confronts the teacher, something's happened to our child, and while they've been here, and blah blah blah, and so we were able right then and there to go into the DVR room and roll back the tape, and we were able to sit there for an hour and 15 minutes with that mom, and she was able to see every move of her child in that classroom. And she saw that, and she said, and actually what had happened was the teacher didn't even see this, but it was caught on camera that her child actually smacked another child in the back of the head, and that child turned around and smacked her child. And and it was all caught on camera, and she went, okay, well, I see what really was going on here, But that could have been a nasty thing if we didn't have the cameras there, or the check-in. We do the check-in and all that kind of stuff too, but it's anything you can do to add a layer, and we kind of feel like our liability is about 97-98%. We could go one more level and do fingerprints, but we're never going to get beyond 98, and the cost of doing fingerprints and all this kind of stuff, we chose to go cameras. I think daycare, you have to do fingerprint, I think, with most daycares, I believe.
Any questions? Anything for our church specific? I know he's given a lot of background from what they do at their own church, and most of that we've already implemented. You can see it in your policy. I encourage you just to kind of look that over. Some of it's just legalese, but the other stuff is pretty important. As regards reporting, one of the things you really didn't get into that is in the policy, is our policy, is that if the media is drawn into a situation, that no one in the church but the senior pastor is to make any report to the media, because there could be conflicting information, there could be anything misleading or whatever. There needs to be one point of contact, or the person that the senior pastor appoints to be the spokesperson.
Right.
So if there is any media attention drawn to our church for any incident that happens, then don't take it upon yourself. No vigilante justice, nothing like that to say what happened. Make sure that gets to the pastor and let him do it, or whoever he's appointed to be the spokesperson to do that. So yeah. Anything else? Clear as mud? If you do have questions, please shoot me an email, give us a call the office or whatever. As you peruse this, if there's something that pops out, are we really doing this? Let me know. That way we can address it. If you have any concerns about it, let us know. I think that's it. Why don't we give a hand to Phil for being here tonight? And,